All that we think about money is not limited in any way, like there's a certain amount of money out there. It's all make-believe. It's all digital. So they can change the digits and then they can create money. Now that's an important consideration, because if they can create money so easily, how do we know it's going to be of value when they're creating a lot of it?
I'm going to be super blunt to anybody watching right now. And Ray, if you think that I'm wrong, I trust that you will jump in. No one is coming to save anybody. And that's the hard truth. This is just going to suck. Like, there is going to be a level of brutality that most of us have not experienced in our lives. Companies are going to go under. People are going to lose their jobs. There are going to be people that are going to struggle to find their next meal.
The same things happen over and over again through time for basically the same reasons. A lot of these things happen once in a lifetime, And if you don't go back and see how they worked over time, then you're in trouble. So there's a pattern. We're in a particular spot in the pattern. The three most important circumstances that existed before we had the downturn, which was caused by a pandemic, but any downturn would have produced the same results. The three most important things that are happening are that we're at the end, late in a long-term debt cycle in which central banks cannot control monetary policy the same way. They can't lower interest rates. They can't get money to a lot of people who need the money in the traditional way. So just like in 1929 to 1932, there was a debt crisis that came as a result of an excessive amount of debt in the boom years. And then when you have that in 1932, we hit zero interest rates. And when they hit zero interest rates in 32, like in 2008, central bank prints money and buys financial assets. Normally, central banks can stimulate the economy by lowering interest rates. But when you hit zero interest rates, that doesn't work. So the last time it hit zero interest rates was 1932. And what they did in 1932 was the same thing they did in 2008. And that is that the central banks prints a lot of money and buys government bonds. The important thing to know about this crisis, and that it happened in the 1930s, is that in order to get the checks that we're needing, where's all this money come from? So the government, when they say, I'm going to pay more for unemployment insurance, or I'm going to give you a loan for a small business, or so on, where did they get the money from? Well, they either tax it, but if they tax it, that's bad. So the government, they can borrow it. That's what a deficit is. The government runs a deficit. And then the question is, who's going to borrow it when everybody's financially strapped? And the Federal Reserve says they have the power to print money, and they will say, I will borrow it and I will lend you the money. That all that we think about money is not limited in any way, like there's a certain amount of money out there. It's all make-believe. It's all digital. So they can change the digits and then they can create money. Now that's an important consideration, because if they can create money so easily, how do we know it's going to be of value when they're creating a lot of it? And that's happened through history. So what we're going through is the same process as happened in the 1930 to 1945 period. So as I was saying, there are three important things. Less effective monetary and credit system. They have to print a lot of money, can threaten the value of money. Second, when you have a large wealth gap and you have an economic downturn, people are more inclined to have conflict. So how that's dealt with, we're going to reconsider how that wealth will be divided. And that'll change taxes and relationships. And then the third is, we're no longer in a world order where the United States is the only dominant power. These three things existed, and the most important things existed, And then we had the downturn in terms of the virus. So you could think of the virus like being a tsunami that came, and if it went, and if we had no more of it, it still would have left a lot of economic damage. So again, 1929 to 32, interest rates hit zero, they print money, we had a large wealth gap, and then they sat down and they figured out, how do we keep it orderly, and how do we change the circumstances with whether it's taxes or how do you reorganize it so that the system works well. There is a risk also at the same time, because the world is going through that, there's a risk of conflict. So in Germany, Hitler came in power in 1933. And he came in power in 1933 because there was a lot of internal fighting as to try to produce order, because everybody, the left and the right, the communists and the fascists, and they're all fighting about wealth, because everybody's fighting about wealth when you have a downturn. And then they were democracies. 4 democracies existed then that chose not to be democracies because they became so disorderly that they wanted some strong leader to take charge and run the country. And then, of course, we had a bunch of those types of leaders, and then they had a war. That's how World War II happened. I was raised with a very modest economic background. My dad was a jazz musician. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. But I was lucky to have parents who cared for me. And I went to a public school, and I got a good education, and I came out to a world of equal opportunity. And I believe that those are fundamental necessities, that you have to know how to behave well with others, to be a good citizen, operate in a civil way, to be able then to go into jobs. These are the things that matter most. The society becomes a fairer society when there's equal opportunity for education. And also, it becomes a more productive society, because the opportunities, when extended throughout the whole population, means that you get more people on the basis of merit. Right now, that system is not operating in a good, effective way. For example, people in the top 40% of income will spend about 5 times as much money on their children's education than those in the bottom 60%. And that's neither fair nor productive. What you don't know is greater than anything you do know. So the important thing are the more general abilities. In terms of investing, what that means is you need to know how to diversify well. In terms of any aspect in life, to know how to deal with what you don't know is more important than anything you know, because the world is so much more surprising than you can really be sure of. You'll notice it different in people. There will be people who, wow, you listen, good question, good question, good question. Then there will be people who can't ask questions, that they're just telling you what they think. You think they're acting smart, they think they're acting smart, and they're the stupid ones. All currencies eventually die, and all empires eventually diminish in their other empires, and the question is essentially the pace of how that happens. We're going to come through more difficult times. I think the next 3 to 5 years will be difficult times in ways that haven't existed in their lifetime, but has existed in other periods of time, like the 1930 to 45 period. So to be able to adapt well, to invent yourself, again, to adapt and to navigate that, maybe with a perspective of knowing what those other times were like, is the best thing to do. Because the same things happen over and over again for basically the same reasons. And once you get that and you have the self-discipline to know how to play the game well, then you'll be fine.